Good morning students, Bindu Chaudhary welcomes you in your civics and social science class, and in this we are covering our unit 4th. The name of the unit is Social Justice and the Marginalized, and in this one we are covering chapter 8th. What chapter 8? Confronting Marginalization, and we had already discussed and read about chapter 7th, Understanding Marginalization, and in that one we discussed about the Dadu's story, how Dadu and his family members were watching on the TV Republic Day parade, and in that one was the appearance of the Adivasis who were dancing in that time, and what was happening in that, it occurs in the minds of the children's where's the why only these people shows every time dancing and singing and this time. Then Dadu correlate that with his story and explained about his own conditions as Adivasis. They suffered a lot. So, in our chapter 7th, we read about Adivasis, about Muslim marginalization and about Dalits marginalization. Hope you recall that one. So, today we are starting our part first of introduction, and in this one we will discuss about the understanding the heading. It means confronting marginalization. We will correlate this with the previous chapter, as we discussed in the previous chapter about Dadu's story, about the marginalization of the Adivasis, about the Dalits and about the Muslims also, how they became lower than the other religious communities. So, maybe though powerless, such groups have fought, protested and struggled against being excluded or dominated by others. This one is the main reason, because these castes or these communities, as we had discussed in chapter 7th also students, they always dominated by other, or we will say majority community peoples. Why? Because as per the relationship of the powerless, these minority groups are powerless, as well as such groups fought and protested and struggle against by the peoples for the domination or excluded by the main path. Okay, see, religious solace, armed struggle, self-improvement and education, economic uplift, there appears to be no one way of doing this. It means lots of suffers. We discussed in our previous parts about the education system in the Muslim communities, in the minority communities, in the Adivasis communities, that their education rate was very low, as well as malnourished they are not totally. When we are talking about the conditions of the children, then malnourishment is also there. So, lots of struggles between the religious, so like between the armed struggle for what? For the self improvement, for the education, as we had discussed that not that much of sufficient as majority communities are. So, in this chapter what we are going to study, this is the main thing. See, we will read about some of the ways in which group and individual challenge existing inequalities. How? Again, what we will discuss here. See, what we are going to study here. First one, we will take steps on invoking fundamental rights. As in our chapter first, the constitution, we discussed about the fundamental rights, and as that fundamental rights we will correlate that in this one. Next one is the laws for the marginalized, as many steps are taken by the judiciaries as per the rules of the law. So, we will discuss that also. Protecting the rights of Dalits and Adivasis. Yes, this is the main theme, that it is important to protect the rights of Dalits and Adivasis. Okay, and we will discuss the story of Kabir here also. कबीर, yes, realize your हिंदी में दोहे होते हैं कबीर के दोहे. So, we will discuss that Kabir in this as per the confronting marginalization topic. So, when we are starting on the first main topic, the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, prevention of Atrocities Act 1989. It means some more rights, some more acts are for the SCs and STs in the 1989. The scourge of manual scavenging is there, Adivasis, and demand and the what, and the conclusion part. We will discuss here, we will discuss about the last hour part of NCERT solutions. So, when we are abbreviating this one, invoking fundamental rights is our first topic here, and in this one we will discuss about the fundamental rights. When we are discussing about the fundamental rights, it's not for the one community or the major community. These rights are applied for the all citizens of India. So, their position in the constitution, it means fundamental rights position in the constitution. The constitution lays down the principles that make our society and polity democratic. It means it is only constitution from being we always lay down the principles that makes our society and our polity democratic. Democratic, yes, we discussed about this one. They are defined in and through the list of fundamental rights that are an important part of the constitution. It means, as in many chapters we discussed about the fundamental rights, and in these fundamental rights we discussed about the rights of every citizen. So, these rights are available to all Indians equally. The main point, please consider here, that these rights are available to all Indians equally. It means right to equality is also there, but totally fundamental rights are equally applied for the all Indian citizens. As far as the conditions of the marginalized, as we discussed about the confronting marginalization and understanding marginalization. So, here we will point out about this one, that are concerned they have drawn on these rights in two ways. Yes, about fundamental rights. See, the first way is by insisting on their fundamental rights, they have forced the government to recognize the injustice done to them. कई बार क्या होता है बच्चों, चाहने या ना चाहने से, कई बार बिना मेंटलिटी के भी, लिटरली वे विल से विदाउट एनी मेंटलिटी, इफ एनी क्राइम इज देयर और एनी sin is there, then injustice is that. And the first important way of thinking is the insisting on their fundamental rights. So, they have forced the government for the fundamental rights to recognize the injustice done to them, because many injustices are there in the society. Second main important theme here is they have insisted that the government enforced these laws. So, all these are literally applicable for the enforcement for the government. Okay. The struggles of the marginalized have influenced the government to frame new laws. So, what's the result of these struggles? Many struggles held by the Adivasis people, by the tribal people, for what? For the framework of the new laws, for the framework of the new laws of the marginalized people, because they struggled a lot for this one, and in keeping with the spirit of the fundamental right. It means कि fundamental rights में जो rights दिए गए हैं, many times that are not implicable, because maybe some reasons that are not totally equally applicable to all the citizens. That's why these marginalized people struggled a lot, and the result came about the enforcement of the new laws that government had to frame, and this one is done by the government for the purpose of the spirit of the fundamental rights. When we are discussing about this one, we will take here an example here about Article 17. See, what's the Article 17 mentioned in the Constitution? We will read here. Article 17 of the Constitution states that untouchability, see the word untouchability has been abolished. बिल्कुल ही जो हम भेदभाव करते हैं, छुआछूत करते हैं, छुआछूत की जो भावना है वह बिल्कुल ख़त्म हो जानी चाहिए. What this means is that no one can henceforth prevent Dalits from educating themselves, entering into temples, using public facilities, etc. As we discussed in our history portion about Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar, and Bhim Rao Ambedkar started 3 movements, temple movement for the entering in the temple of Dalits or SC/STs. Same here, all these Article 17 mentions is what, students? Article 17 mentions about the prevention of Dalits, because कई बार क्या होता है कि उनको एजुकेशन प्रॉपर नहीं दिया जाए, बट ऑल द रूल्स आर इम्प्लीमेंटेड. सो they wanted to educate themselves, education is compulsory, they wanted to enter in the temples to pray to God. So entering temples and using public facilities all are needed by every citizen, but many times it is not really, in truth it is not really implementing in the societies. So all these things henceforth prevent the rights under Article 17 of the Constitution. See, it also means that it is wrong to practice untouchability and that this practice will not be tolerated. See the words, student, here, untouchability will not be tolerated by a democratic government. As India has a democratic government, so in our democratic government, toleration about the untouchability is unbearable. No one will bear the untouchability. Okay, in fact untouchability is a punishable crime now. और अब हम किसी को कह भी दें ना छुआछूत के लिए, अनटचेबिलिटीज़ के लिए, सो एज पर द लॉज ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन दिस इज़ अ क्राइम, पनिशेबल क्राइम. There are other sections in the Constitution that help to strengthen the argument against untouchability. It means not only Article 17 mentioned here, but other sections also prevent the powers of the arguments of the untouchabilities, because many times it is not implemented in the real situation. Second, when we will correlate this one with the Article 15, what happens in this one? See, for example, Article 15th of the Constitution notes that no citizen of India shall be discriminated against on the basis of religion, on the basis of races, on the basis of caste, on the basis of male and female, it means sexual, and on the basis of the place of birth. Yes, place of birth is also mentioned because you learnt about this in your class 7th textbook in the chapter on equality. जब हम equality का chapter 7th class का कर रहे थे बच्चों, उस टाइम भी हमने इसको mention किया था. Clearly we mentioned all these things in our chapter 7th also. So whatever discrimination based against on the basis of the religion, on the basis of the casteism, on the basis of the races, on the basis of the main thing, sex, male or female, gender discrimination, place of birth discrimination, then what is the important thing here? The important thing in Article 15 mentioned in our Constitution that no discriminations are there on the basis of all these things. This has been used by Dalits to seek equality where it has been denied to them. See, it is clearly mentioned that Dalits who suffered a lot always needs to be equality, and for this equality purpose what they will do, they and we ourselves firm have a decision that no Dalits discrimination is there, no untouchabilities is there, because in our Constitution Article 17, Article 15 and other sections also mentioned that no discriminations on the basis of the casteism and the other things. See, when we are discussing about Dalits, Dalits can invoke or draw on a fundamental right or rights, we will say, in situations where they feel that they have been treated badly by some individual or community or even by the government. So it is clearly mentioned in our fundamental rights that invoke or draw on a fundamental rights about the situations, whether by the any condition, whether by the individual, whether by the community or whether by the government itself. So no bad treatments against the Dalits. Okay, they have drawn the attention of the government of India to the constitution, demanding that the government abide by it and do justice to them. So Dalits, as we discussed, the Dalits are in the minority community. So in our constitution, it is clearly written by the laws, by the peoples who made our constitution, that no discriminations, no inequalities on the basis of these things. So the government abide by it and do justice to the Dalits. When we are discussing here, similarly, one more thing is here. Similarly, other minority groups have drawn on the fundamental rights section of our constitution. Yes, as Dalits, as Muslims and as Adivasis tribal peoples, everything has mentioned equal rights, equal fundamental rights. Okay. One more thing is here, the right to freedom. Fundamental right is there. So the right to freedom of religion and cultural and educational rights are always necessary for the every community, maybe minor or maybe major community, but these rights are the fundamental rights and equally treated to all the citizens. In the case of the cultural and educational rights, what's the main important thing? Literally we will ask you that distinct cultural and religious groups like the Muslims, like the Parsis, have the right to be guardians of the content of their culture, as well as the right to make decisions on how best this content is to be preserved. So this is especially important as per the Muslims and as per the Parsis, because of their cultural and educational levels also. Thus, by granting different forms of cultural rights, they also mentioned in everything about the fundamental rights. When we are discussing about the constitution, the constitution also tries to secure and ensure cultural justice to such groups, because only constitution is there who tries to ensure the fundamental rights to all the public, all the citizens, especially when we are discussing about the Muslims, when we are discussing about the Parsis. So cultural justice is always equal to these types of groups. The constitution does this so that the culture of these groups is not dominated, not wiped out by the culture of the majority community. So it is important to secure their culture, their traditions, their equal rights, because by domination on the minority groups, not only they left their culture, but many things they left. So it is the constitution who helped them. See, when we are discussing about chapter 17, that one also Dadu and other Adivasis peoples left many things, many cultural and traditional values of them. They recognized 10,000 plant species, but what's the position? Because after switching off from the place, from the forest, they switched off to the cities, and many things left with the switching off process. Why? Because हर जगह तो पेड़ नहीं होते हैं, that species are not available in the urban areas. So time by time they forget to recognize the species. Same here, student. What's happened? It is only our constitution that secure the culture of these groups, because by the majority of the majority groups always forced on the minority groups, so they not wiped out from the society of the Muslims, of the Parsis. So, it is the important right of the constitution and the minority peoples. We will continue our next part in our next session. Students, stay with us.